All right. Well, welcome everyone. On behalf of Makuho and the session presenters, I would like to welcome you to today's session. I want to remind you that an evaluation form will be available on the conference website, as well as at the end of this session. I will drop the QR code in the chat for everyone. At the end of the session, please be sure to complete the evaluation. And without further ado, please welcome Gianna to the stage for supporting our student leaders in post-2020.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Katie. Thank you all for being here. I want to echo what Katie said, and just if you feel comfortable, feel free to come on video. And I will, if you also feel comfortable, ask you to unmute yourselves and share with the group, just so you know what you're getting into. This is going to be a little bit of a reflective presentation. So I hope that you are in that mindset. As we start here today, I am going to talk a little bit about myself. So my name is Gianna Panulo. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I want to also recognize what lens I come at this presentation with, and I am a white cisgender woman. I currently live in New Jersey, but I unfortunately work outside of the Makuho region, and so I work in the Nyakuho region. I commute to New York every day, and I work for the Juilliard School, where I am the Assistant Director of Student Affairs. I specifically work on student activities, student leadership, student involvement, student organizations, and student hiring. And so a lot of the lens in which I'm coming to from this presentation is just talking about that hiring process. I am the hiring manager for all student leaders within our organization. So residence life, orientation leaders, campus activities board, and diversity advocates, among others. The other thing that I wanted to share is just my love for Makuho. Go Makuho. I was more involved from 2014 to 2018, where I had the privilege of working or being in the VIP program. So that is a wonderful opportunity that I encourage all of your students to also take part in. And a little bit more about my journey. There it goes. I started off my journey at Westminster Choir College of Rider University, where I thought I was going into music. I then became an RA and obviously loved that experience. I followed that by working as a residence director at Salisbury University, where I was able to get my graduate degree. Followed by that, I worked at Pace University. While I was there, I was also able to participate in the RELI program, which is Regional Entry Level Institute for new professionals in the Makuho and the Nyakuho region. And that is when, about a year and a half ago, I transitioned to the Juilliard School in my current role. And I haven't looked back, but I am not someone who retired from residence life as so many people do. I am someone who holds residence life very near and dear to my heart, and I aspire to move back into residence life throughout my career journey. So the learning outcomes for today are, we are going to define why we are showing up for our students. We are going to identify the impacts of 2020. We are going to identify how 2020 has directly impacted us as professionals. We are going to name the ways in which Schlossberg's transition theory can impact the way that we move forward to support our students and our student leaders. And we are going to create a list of areas in which we can impact in 2021 that's within our professional reach. We all have different positions. We all have different roles within our institution. And one thing that I want to say is I hope that no matter where you are on your professional journey, you can take something away from this, and there is something here for you. So my first question is, what does showing up mean to you? Why are we showing up for our students, and in what ways do you show up for your students? I know that's a broad question, but if anyone wants to share sort of just the reason why they're here at this presentation and trying to figure out the best ways to show up, I would love for you to feel free to raise your hand or just unmute.
Sorry, my camera's closed. One of the reasons I wanted to attend the session is we actually just did kind of like a, I don't know what you call it, but we asked basically like all of my RAs. One of our ADs came in and just asked like, hey, how has it been being an RA for you this year? And it was really sad. Like it was really, really sad. Like it was like all the joy from the position, all the good things. Like it just was like a bad experience for them. And like nothing much has changed job requirement wise. It's just because it's so hard to get in touch with their residents. And a lot of them were saying like, just like all the reasons I became an RA, I'm not getting to do them. So it's like, why am I an RA? So I definitely want to like make sure that I, as their supervisor, am doing whatever I can in my power to like help them actually enjoy the position. Because I know for me, being an RA during a non-pandemic, it was like really amazing. And that's what they were hoping for. And so just looking for ways to better engage my students so they still see, joy in their position, but just joy in being a college student in general.
Hi, my name is Audrey Burkett from Davis and Elkins College, pronouns she, hers, hers. I agree with Michaela, that's why I'm here. But I'm also here more for myself, dealing with the challenges, putting on a good face for my students because they are struggling during this time. I feel like I myself am struggling with burnout and am trying to find ways on how I can motivate myself and be better so that when I go home after my daytime hours that I can focus on them when necessary. So I'm really looking forward to maybe hearing some good tips on how we can be more present.
Hi, I'm Katie Fultz, she, her, hers. I'm at the American University in Washington, D.C. Part of the reason why I picked this one was because I don't have any students on campus this year. We actually only have our emergency housing, which is about 30 to 40 students right now, hoping that we can expand that a little bit in the spring. So all of the students that I typically support are not here. I run RHA and NRHH and our Student Staff Advisory Council. And so those direct relationships aren't there. However, they're still reaching out to me via like text message, and like that personal relationship is still there. And so just looking at how people are showing up for their students when maybe they're not truly their advisors right now. I don't have, for some context, RHA runs on student fees. If I don't have students in the residence halls, I don't have student fees, so I can't do any programming with them. But they signed up and were elected to a position, and so they still want some of that leadership experience, coaching, and guidance that they would have gotten from an advisor-advisee relationship.
Josh, were you?
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't sure if you were going to say anything else.
No, that's okay.
But yeah, my name is Josh. I work at Seton Hall as an assistant director, working with student development and programming. So two things in attending this session was, one, the RAs just want interaction. Like they're missing seeing their professors, their friends, housing residence life folks, all that stuff. So they're just missing that. That's one thing I noticed. And then the other piece I think is just that they're looking for the support and the confidence builder, because they get discouraged by things, or trying to host physically distant programming, like how to go about that. They get discouraged by the attendance and all that kind of stuff. So just kind of being that support system for them in terms of kind of promoting, like, hey, you can do this. Here's some ideas. We can spend some extra money for this like bigger program than we usually do. So just kind of instilling the confidence in them that, hey, keep going, you're doing a great job with this. And if you need to take a mental health break, then that's okay too. So I think they're just looking for those types of things.
Absolutely.
Hello, my name is Jim Sabatini, he, him pronouns. I'm an residence life coordinator at Towson University. And I came to this session because I'm on both our departmental RA training and selection, as well as our like desk staff training and selection. And we close 3 days in. So we have some activated RAs, a handful, and then the majority of our staff was sent home. But we plan to go full bore in the spring. So we'll see what happens with that. But trying to like get tips and like help for like motivation and how do we transition these RAs that have been working to continuing to be working, you know, that their peers, like no one got a break in this pandemic, but like they weren't like engaging with their residents, and it's going to look differently because they're going to go from having like 6 residents back to their normal like 60. So just how to like keep that engagement and enthusiasm throughout this weird time.
Absolutely. Is anyone else interested in sharing or just giving us a wave and maybe their pronouns? So as we move forward in the presentation, we know a little bit more about you.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Estelle. I'm the coordinator for Residence Life Operations at Georgian Court University in New Jersey. I picked this presentation because my staff is just really struggling right now through all of the changes, you know, not being the experience that they had signed up for, like so many people have already said, through the frustrations of, you know, students not wearing their masks and not participating in things, but then complaining because there's nothing to do, and the vicious circle that is really the hell of residence life this year. So looking for some tips and tricks of ways to help keep them motivated or remotivate them in some cases, and to just help get them through this time and even beyond, as things will probably likely not revert back to what they were expecting. And mine are she, her, hers pronouns.
Absolutely. Okay. If no one else would like to share, we are going to move on. So the first question I have for you is, who are your student leaders? I have permission from all of my students to use their faces and their names, so no worries there, but who are your student leaders? The exact questions that I want to ask are, who are they? What are you showing up for? What spheres of influence do you have at your institution? Like I said before, no matter what level you're at, we all have some sort of sphere of influence. What change can you make within that sphere of influence? And what do your students need right now? A lot of those things you've already identified. So I am just going to identify them for myself. And my students are my orientation leaders, my campus activities board, my graduate students, which I often feel are sometimes a forgotten population of people who we need to serve. Sorry, I'm moving all of your faces from the bottom to the top of the screen. My resident assistants and just the students in general. What do I have spheres of influence over is the hiring process, the training process, which I'm lucky enough that we cross-train all of our student leaders at once. So we have the campus activities board there, and the orientation leaders and the resident assistants and the diversity advocates all together. So there's a big impact there. And programming and professional development. Now, if you don't have specific influence over any of those, I want you to think about maybe the even things on a smaller micro level. So you have influence over your one-on-ones with students. You have influence over your one-on-ones with your supervisors. You might have influence on different things within your department, even if they aren't large scale, and even if you haven't identified a huge way to make an impact. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds of me not talking just to reflect on that for yourself. Awesome. One thing that I do with my students, and we didn't do it this time, take it or leave it, but sometimes I ask them to smile at the screen once they've reflected or they've finished what they've done. So I know that they are here and with me and paying attention. So I might ask you all later to smile at the screen if you've done it. So let's start with checking ourselves in the year 2020. So we started off with the COVID-19 pandemic, and that was sort of obviously the ripple effect to everything else that has happened. By no means do I think that this is a full, complete list of things that have happened, but just some things that have impacted our positions and our institutions are then the students were stripped of their on-campus experiences. Can I get a emoji, a thumbs up emoji or a clappy emoji if you had to get your students all off campus? Yeah, absolutely. And that was a difficult transition for everyone. I think it's almost all of us here. I mean, almost everywhere around the entire country, but some schools did let their students stay. Then we had furloughs and layoffs. And I don't want you to specifically out your colleagues or yourself if that was you, so no need to use an emoji for this one, but that has impacted all of our work, whether it has been at our institution or not. The next thing is presidential impeachment and just the turmoil around the presidential election, which we are dealing with to this day, obviously, and we will continue to have a lasting effect. Then we have the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement ignited. We didn't have many of our student leaders on campus at that time, but it obviously will have a lasting impact on the way we do our work, hopefully forever. Next, we have budget cuts. Obviously, that is something that has impacted all of us. And then fall 2020 limited in-person activity. So I don't know, one of you mentioned that you can have socially distant programs at my school. Well, the students are not coming back until Monday. So we started a little bit later, but we are not allowed to gather our students for anything outside of academic classes. So even though they are back, we are still trying to engage them over Zoom after they've had a full day. And their stamina is just not there at this point because they aren't used to having a full day and then coming home, going onto Zoom. So obviously this is just a few things that have impacted us. I'm interested to hear from some of you all if there's been any other really large impacts on your institution and what that is. Yeah, Katie?
Being in DC, the District of Columbia's decisions about how to handle COVID have impacted us. So they have hotspot zones and they update it every 2 weeks. It states. And if you come from any of those states, you have to quarantine 14 days once you're here. And so that regulation went into effect right before we were supposed to welcome students back. And so we ended up announcing our closure on like July 30th. And we were intending to start training all of our student leaders on August 2nd. So like a really fast turnaround because of district regulations impacting us, as well as the other institutions in the area. As soon as Georgetown announced and GW announced, we knew that we were coming right alongside of that.
Yeah, absolutely. That brings up another good point. We have a large international student population, and all of the international regulations, every week we are hearing updates from our international office. Can they work? Can they come back? Do they have the correct visa, what is changing around that? Is there anything else that has had a significant impact on the way you are working in your day-to-day positions?
I know on my end, we actually are required to rotate between remote days and in-person days. And so for housing and residence life, Mondays we have 2 people in, but then every other day it's only 1 staff member in the main office. So the challenge of working with our office assistants, but then trying to have meetings or whatever else, but then needing to help out with a phone call or whatever, it's just kind of balancing it on that end. And same with our live-in staff, they're also rotating in office days and remote days. So they can still assist, but that's just been a struggle of trying to adapt in that way.
Absolutely.
I think for me, hi, my name is Carrie, she, her, hers pronouns. I think at my institution, a lot of what has been impacting myself as well as our student staff and students is policy changes and how quick they've been happening. Sometimes we get told the day of, we have to relay that right away to our student staff and then literally be implemented within like an hour. And so with us not being able to fully process it or our student staff and then having to uphold that for students, has been very challenging because it doesn't give folks enough time to process. And the folks who are making these decisions are folks who are working from home, who aren't the boots on the ground, and then having our student staff not being able to understand like, well, who's making this? Why is this a policy? And they're feeling like their voices can't be shared then in that policy making process. And then again, we can only advocate for them so much because we also have to uphold those policies too, and balancing that as like an act has been very, very difficult.
I think something for me, my name's Dominic. I work at Misericordia University as an area coordinator. It's in Dallas, Pennsylvania. So that's kind of by Scranton, Pennsylvania, if you know where that is. I think one of the difficult things that we usually do every year was the not getting to know your new RA staff and or see them in person, because that training, that however long, we have 2.5 weeks of training in the summer because our football players come back early. And that time is really, you see each other from breakfast, that's mandatory, all the way until the evening activity that you try to plan to kind of wrap up the day and kind of get everybody together. And that's been a difficult part to not, I guess, get to know our new staff members as much as you would like. And you see them around, but you don't have that connection as you would if you saw them and talked to them every day. And same for different, I guess, groups and clubs that you run. It's all virtual. You try to start up a new group that you're trying to run with students to plan programs and you haven't met with them in person, and it's just all virtual. And I'm more of I like to see you in person than virtual to kind of get the excitement going. So I think that's one of the difficult things that continues to pop up.
Absolutely.
We had a 10-day move-in process that ended on a Sunday. And then Wednesday we announced we were closing and you had to go home within like that next week. So then it was quick pivots, like all that week of some buildings are staying open. We have 3 buildings that are in public-private partnership. They decided they couldn't let their students out of their leases. So those 3 buildings were complete full occupancy, no like COVID changes or anything like that. So it was difficult for students knowing if they were still had a job as an RA, if their building was closing, because our administration kept that very tight-lipped of like which buildings were like our special housing options. And then like pivoting just so much. So I guess that's the biggest thing that was happening here is not knowing all of the details, because there was no like Greek party that forced us to close. We just had so much community spread with no unknown cause that our president was like, I don't know, let's close. We were one of the only ones in the Maryland USM to do so. So they're like, oh, what are you guys doing over there? So very interesting.
Absolutely. And all of these things that you shared, thank you so much for sharing these hardships. They are no one size fits all solution. And there is no way that we as professionals, no matter where we are on the totem pole, all the way from a president of the university, like honestly, they can't predict this future either. So the things that we have in our control are the things that I want to focus on. I also want you to identify for yourself what is a lasting impact and what is a fleeting impact. So although these things feel so big to us right now, the students in 5 years will never see the results of people losing their on-campus housing last spring. And so this list can absolutely change for different people, but just for me, putting these things into different categories, the things that are a lasting impact for me and that will hopefully, and my goal is that they will change the way that I do work for the better, is COVID-19, the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, the presidential impeachment and turmoil, and budget cuts are going to have a lasting impact for me. But the students stripped of their on-campus experience, Shayna said it really well during the opening conversation, that we also need to be moving forward. And although that is where our focus should be right now, we also need to think about the future and those major impacts. The furloughs, I am at a school where we are lucky enough not to have anyone on my team or the larger student development team on furlough anymore. So that is not something that's having a lasting impact in this moment. And just the fall 2020 limited in-person activity for me is going to have a little bit more of a fleeting impact than a lasting impact. So how has this impacted you personally and professionally? And after this question, we are going to move on to Schlossberg's transition theory and sort of those exact ways that we can support our students. But I do believe that the way that this pandemic is treating us and the way that we are feeling that the institution is supporting us directly affects how we then show up for our students and what then plays into the way that we act for our students. So I just want you to reflect on these 3 questions. What has your response been and how has it personally affected you to all those events on the timeline? How have you been supported by your institution in response to this? And do you feel supported? And has this impacted the way you are showing up? Has this impacted the care that you bring to all of your meetings for your students? So I'm going to give you about 1 minute to reflect on those questions. And then we will come back as a group. Okay, can I get a smile at the screen if you feel like you have reflected? Love it. Okay. So I want to make sure we move forward past this question. So does anyone feel like they have something really pertinent that they would like to share with the group or really different than someone else might have thought of?
I think really quick for
Yeah.
the how have you been supported by your institution. I heard a lot of people in the last session and just in general that they've had to limit in-person programming. At our institution, we are much smaller, probably only about 700 or 800 on campus this semester. We were grateful enough, and our higher up, our VP, was encouraging in-person programming, obviously with stipulations, and we had to present a nice presentation of how we would keep social distancing, masks, sanitizing, everything. But they encouraged us to keep trying to do in-person program as much as possible, use the outside and utilizing bigger spaces on campus, which I think is a positive thing. Obviously, we'd like to have 300 people in a space, but we had to limit that. But I think that was one of the ways that they supported us, is that we expressed that in during COVID and over the summer, that we wanted to keep that interaction with the student, because if we don't, then what's the point of them coming on campus other than just to get, you know what I mean? If we can't talk to them or see them in person or interact with them, then they might as well, stay home at heart. But we wanted to try to keep sort of connection with them. But we were grateful to have the opportunity still to do in-person programming, but safely.
Absolutely. I have a follow-up question for you, actually. Did all of your student staff react well to that in-person programming?
So maybe I should preface it, for the RAs, we didn't require them to do in-person programming. So for their programming model, we gave them, they have to do a virtual program, and then we encourage them to do in-person if they felt comfortable. More of the programming aspect from our side, we do programming a lot of the residence office. So, and we are the ones that plan the welcome. So we, as a professional staff and my RDs that I work with, we thought of ways to keep that interaction with the students, because we felt comfortable doing that, but we didn't task, I guess, our RA staff to do that if they didn't feel comfortable. So that was more, I guess that's how it was split up. We encourage them to do it, but we don't require them to do it if they don't feel it's safe.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else? Great. So now we're going to talk a little bit about Schlossberg's transition theory and how we can use that specifically to support the student leaders that we're talking about. So the first part of the transition theory, we think about the situation, and we think about if the situation was anticipated or unanticipated. And a lot of what we're talking about, most of what we're talking about here today, is unanticipated. But I think that there are some things within our conversations and within our realm that are anticipated. Whether, no matter what president gets elected, we knew that there was going to be a presidential election 4 years ago. And I think that all of us probably could have anticipated some turmoil, as there honestly is with every election. It just might be a little bit heightened right now. And so some of these things, it will be the best thing for us to realize what those anticipated things are. And as we move forward, plan for those anticipated things. So the next question in terms of the situation is, how do we support the situation? I've said it multiple times that we can't change what is happening on many levels. And so the questions we need to identify with our student leaders is what is in our control and what is not in our control. We need to help them identify that, and we need to help them get that message across to their students. There is so many polarizing topics right now, whether it be the president, whether it be masks, whether it be the pandemic as a general sense. We need to figure out for students on every side of the issue and for our student leaders, what is in their control? If they are having anxiety around contracting the virus, what can they do? What can they do to minimize their impact, and what is in the control of them? We need to remind our students that I don't think we are ever going back to what the old normal was, or at least not for a really long time. But this new normal, this uncertain times, is not something that we will stay in forever. We don't know when that will change, but we know that the uncertainty will change. And so just reminding students of that fact, and helping them and giving them the tools to remind their students of that. We also need to identify other sources of stress which may be exaggerating the issue. So what other things happening in these student lives, by choice or not by choice, is going on that is exaggerating where we are with them, how they're feeling in these moments. After the situation, we talk about self. And this one is is really hard because this part of Schlossberg's transition theory is just who are you in a room and how are you showing up in that room. And so we know that this virus is hurting our BIPOC populations and people of color at a way faster rate than our white student leaders. And so we need to think about who are these people and how are they showing up to these spaces? And we need to help them recognize that for themselves and help them be able to have those conversations with their students. And so we are trying to model the best way for them to have these conversations so that they can go on and be student leaders and have those conversations with their students, whether it's in person, whether it's on Zoom, whether it is, no matter how it takes place. The next thing that can be very helpful in terms of self is identify if there is any resources based on identity groups within your institution, because that can be really helpful to process with other people who are in the same boat as them. Maybe it is loss of a family member, counseling groups and things like that. But just to be able to talk with other people who are like them or going through the same things as them is going to be really helpful to those student leaders, as well as just regular psychological counseling resources. The next thing is social support. And so Schlossberg breaks this up into 4 different categories. So they have the intimate relationships, the family members, the networks of friends, and then the institutions and communities. So we are the institutions and communities. So we can provide one of those circles of support. But working with our students to identify where they can rely on those other circles of support to provide them more willpower to get through the day. And so they are able to continue to show up. So identifying either, again, those intimate relationships, those family units, or those networks of friends that they can rely on and how they can utilize each of those is absolutely conversations that we can be having with our student leaders. And then the last one here is just strategies. So of those 3 first S's, they're called the 4 S's in this theory, but what can we modify about the situation and what strategies can we create with our student leaders so that they can be better prepared to show up as students? So I want you to look back on the first question I asked you when I asked you to write down why you're here, why you're showing up, and what spheres of influence you have. So I want you to think about those S's and think about those spheres of influence, whether they're micro or macro, and think about how you can implement some of those things within this theory we want to go back, not forward. Some of these things within this theory to what you can do in the future. So I'll give you a minute to do that. And then I will share what I came up with, and I would love if some of you share what you came up with. Okay. Does anyone want to share some of the things that they they take away and they can pledge to do for their students? I can go first. So some of the things on my list, and I won't read this whole thing, but I pledge to engage in difficult topics at my one-on-ones with my student leaders so that they know I care. I plan to host programs around internet safety and online dating. I pledge to email out safety tips weekly so our students feel that they're in more control of the situation at hand. I plan to host more programs around mental health and strategies of coping. I am planning affinity groups for after the election, no matter who wins. I'm creating marketing that showcases the diversity of our student leaders. And I'll skip a few down to I will work with my graduate student to find the best balance of work, school, and life. And lastly, I will show up every day for my student leaders and make time to process with them and hear them, no matter what else is going on. I am going to share sort of the way that I got there and got some of these things on that list. What I did was I am taking all of the pieces of my job in which I felt I had control over and I have agency over, and I'm breaking those down into different parts. So as an example, I took the life cycle of a student leader, and this isn't a specific theory, this is just from my brain and the things that we do at Juilliard. And so I'm going to analyze what has happened in the past and what I can do differently in the future. And that's sort of how I came up with the list that I showed you. So I took all of those as we go down the line. So going back to what you pledged to do or what you hope to do you have any ideas of how you can better show up for your student leaders based on the things we've talked about? Okay, so I will go back to my list, and if any of you want to take a look at that, feel free to utilize some of them on your own list. And then as we are pretty much out of time, I want to make sure that I share the evaluation link with you all, and goes to Makuho, but then I will also receive the feedback that you have. I would love feedback to make sure my presentation gets better for the future. And that link is in the chat. It is at the beginning, and then Katie, I think you just shared it with me instead of the group. Perfect. And then it's also now at the end. And I also just wanted to share my contact information if any of you want to continue the conversation. And that QR code is also the link to the evaluation. Does anyone have any questions?
Well, thank you very much. Just a reminder, make sure you fill out the evaluation, and the content from today's session will be uploaded to the materials will be uploaded to the annual program from the annual program co-chairs. They'll do that for you. So
thank you all so much for coming and participating. I really enjoyed the conversation.